Welcome back, everyone, to our next special session on stability and growth in the euro area economy. I'm Richard Boudreaux. I'm the Madrid bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal. And our speaker today is Jeroen Dijsselbloem. He is finance minister of the Netherlands, president of the Eurogroup of finance ministers, and chairman of the European Stability Mechanism. His 22 years of distinguished public service have given him command of a wide range of policy fields, including agriculture, the environment, education, and finance. He has served on the elected council of his home district and in his country's House of Representatives. In the Eurogroup, he is an advocate of a euro area approach to the challenge of making the 18 national economies more competitive. He recently suggested that, parallel to specific structural reforms at each national level, Eurozone countries should coordinate joint reforms with a single standard and a joint supervisor on the model of the European Banking Union. After he speaks, I will collect your questions. It'll work just as it did before. You write your questions down, hand them to the assistants, and they will pass them to me, and I will read as many questions as Mr. Dijsselbloem has time to answer. Please write your questions clearly. If I can't read your question, I can't answer it. I can't ask it. And feel free to send up your questions even before Mr. Dijsselbloem finishes remarks. That way the discussion can move more quickly. And now I give the floor to the president of the Eurogroup.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, is this working? No. Not yet. I have a very good voice, but yet the microphone now works, so that's better. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Last October, I participated in what was called the Nueva Economía Forum in Madrid, and we then discussed the fresh, positive signs for Spain that we could see, for Spain and the euro area. And a clean exit for Spain out of the banking program was in sight. 4 months later, I'm happy to be back in Spain, and this time meeting at the Guggenheim Museum, this wonderful Guggenheim Museum here in Bilbao. As well as being a beautiful museum, I think it's also a symbol of recovery. After Bilbao suffered an economic downturn in the 90s, it was the establishment of this museum, of the Guggenheim, that ushered the city's revival, and it was the start of a new era. So there could hardly be a better place to affirm that Spain has continued its recovery and has made a successful exit from the program. The road to recovery has not been easy, and the job is not yet done. But both Spain and the euro area as a whole have gained strength. Your country has responded in the same decisive and comprehensive way as the rest of Europe. First, we've taken measures to put public finances back on track, on a sustainable path. Secondly, we addressed problems in our financial sector at the European level by establishing a banking union at unprecedented speed. And now we are ready for the next challenge in our recovery process, which is, in my mind, especially about structurally reforming our economies. And by this I mean that we need to become more competitive. Only by modernizing our economies throughout the Eurozone, we can increase our growth potential. We still have to reform our labor markets and product markets, like Christine Lagarde said this morning, make our government systems and public sector more efficient, our education systems more sophisticated. Now, as you all know, growth levels are picking up, but they are still too low. And at the same time, unemployment levels are unacceptably high, particularly for young people. Spain is one of many Eurozone countries where youth unemployment is a major problem. And the solution is a prolonged period of stronger growth so that we can create jobs and remain competitive with the rest of the world. Past experiences show that we need sustainable, solid growth rather than cheap credit and high levels of debt. Sustainable growth does not come easily. It needs further restructuring of our economies and inevitably structural adjustments. Above all, it calls for political courage. The political courage to convince our electorates of the need of further adjustments. Now, we all treasure the European social model, characterized by a strong welfare state and collective systems. And it has taken us many years to build this model and provide a cushion in difficult times. Many people are now concerned that we are dismantling the welfare state. But in my mind, what we are doing is making sure that we can sustain our social model in Europe, and we need to become economically stronger to finance the social model, to fund it, and provide a similar level of welfare in the years to come. This is, I think, the key issue for the near future. 2 weeks ago, Minister de Guindos and I participated in an OECD seminar where Angel Gurria presented a very interesting report about the euro area. We learned that reforms to product market regulations alone, could boost output in the euro area by 6% over the next 10 years. 6% on average extra growth in a period of 10 years' time, just by dealing with the rules and regulations that are standing in the way in the product markets. Labour markets reform will help us tackle high joblessness over the medium term, especially giving new opportunities to young people. So the greatest potential for creating economic growth lies in the member states dealing with their structural problems in the economy. Modernizing the economy is an integral part of the programs for countries receiving financial support. And it has led throughout the eurozone to an impressive transformation. For instance, Ireland has implemented a comprehensive public sector reform, widening its tax base, improving labour markets institutions. Portugal has improved conditions for setting up businesses, opened up professional services to competition, and taken steps to curb tax evasion. Greece has significantly improved its business climate, bolstered competition in retail markets, and become more competitive, resulting, for example, in a strong revival of the tourist sector. Though Spain only receives support for its banking sector, this country is a strong example for far-reaching reforms. It has not only made impressive reforms in its financial sector, it has also actively modernized labour market policies, including areas that have proved difficult to reform in the past. Spain has modified the collective wage bargaining system, reformed benefit schemes, and eased job protection for regular contracts. The push for reform, however, has not been confined to these countries. In France, for example, the minimum contribution period for full pension entitlement has been increased, and France includes plans to cut labour costs for employers, thereby addressing an important factor in its competitiveness. But also in Estonia. Estonia simplified product market regulations and improved its incentives for labour force participation. And these are just a few examples of the measures that countries are currently undertaking. The shared sense of urgency across the euro area is encouraging. And at the same time, we can and must do more, all of us. We need higher levels of growth to deal with unemployment and to bring down debt levels, both public and private. As I've said, the OECD has highlighted the huge potential that still exists in the euro area if we modernize our economies. Now, our approach to macroeconomic reform has so far been based on two main principles. First of all, it's primarily a national responsibility, and second, the coordination of reforms by member states is aimed at tackling spillover effects that could threaten Europe's monetary union. In my mind, that is rather a defensive approach. We're just going to deal with it, we're just going to coordinate if we have negative spillovers. And I think it's time for a more offensive approach in which we focus on the euro area dimension as a whole. The benefit of growth-enhancing reforms is not limited to the country where the measures are taken. And as we are all highly interconnected, growth in one country benefits other countries as well. So we should strengthen growth in the Eurozone by working together jointly on our competitiveness. And in tandem with specific national policy changes, joint reforms can further advance our agenda. When I spoke at the Nueva Economía Forum in Madrid, I advocated leniency on budgetary targets could only be granted if and only if countries reform at the same time. In other words, as was said earlier with Christine Lagarde, the European Commission has allowed for countries to be given more time to deal with their budgets. Part of the deal should be that these countries put an extra effort on the reform side. Now, how would this work in practice? I believe that reforms should be made part of our budgetary process. As part of that annual process, every year in June, the Commission sets budget targets for each country. And in case the Commission, given economic circumstances, grants a country more time to deal with, for example, excessive deficits, the Commission should also make explicit which structural reforms should be put in place in return. In parallel with the budgetary process, an effective action on reforms has to be shown within a period of half-year time. The next important step in our budgetary process is always in November, when we discuss all the draft budgets in the Eurogroup. The Commission gives its assessment and identifies possible risks in the draft budgets. Last November, for the first time, the ministers had an open and frank discussion in the Eurogroup, and countries where risks were identified agreed to take additional measures. Now, next time we discuss this, next year, I think the progress and plans also on the reform side should be taken into account. This way we can integrate the process in reforms in our common budgetary procedures. Further, identifying joint reforms in crucial sectors of our economies can be helpful to reach our common goal. A strong example of this is the joint approach to our national banking sectors by creating a banking union with the same standards, with a single supervisor and a single set of rules for supervision and resolution. We could make similar joint reforms in other crucial sectors of our economy. In specific cases, we could define standards of best practices which everyone should adhere to. This could help trigger reforms that are inevitable but politically hard to deal with. And this would enable all countries to move forward towards the best practices in Europe. An example of such a specific theme could be service markets, in particular protected professions. Politically, this is a very sensitive subject in almost all of our countries. But by moving the reform discussion to European level, we could open up professions in the same manner across the euro area. More specifically, if Eurozone evaluation shows that certain countries have been successful at opening up a certain closed profession for outsiders, we could use this example as a best practice for all. Peer pressure could help to achieve breakthroughs in long-lasting political standoffs in certain countries. Professions will once again be accessible, especially to newcomers. Services and product markets will be opened up for young professionals, and starting up new businesses in those markets could become far more attractive. Ladies and gentlemen, our task ahead is challenging, both economically and politically. But it's important to realize that modernizing our economies is the only way to achieve our common goal of sustainable growth throughout the Eurozone. And I think we owe it to future generations to foster growth and jobs so that they can benefit from the high welfare standards and a strong social model that we have built in Europe. The World Bank, not so long ago, called Europe a convergence machine. Now, the crisis has made this machine hamper, so now let's get this machine restarted, creating new perspectives and opportunities throughout Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have many questions here. I'll try to sort them out and pose them by topic. The first question is about the debt level in Europe. The question is, are the current levels of public debt and projected future levels of public debt an important limitation for the sustainable growth here in Spain and in Europe in general, and what are the solutions to this debt problem?
It varies very much between countries in the eurozone. In general terms, also here the key issue is more growth. I mean, if we are going to deal with the public debt that we've built up over the course of the crisis, we simply need more growth to get rid of that debt. We are in what's called a balance sheet crisis. It's not just about public debt, it's also about private debt. It's about debt in companies, in households, in banks sometimes, sometimes even in pension funds. And all of these institutions, private and public, need to strengthen their balance sheets in order to once again be able to invest and to consume. Now that is a tiresome process which will take time. That's the reason why this particular crisis, the character of this crisis, makes us take longer to get out of. But key issue here is to push forward the reforms like I mentioned, in which, to my mind, and the OECD has proven this, can bring us to a higher level of growth. There is more potential in Europe than we have come to believe. I think throughout Europe there has been, during the crisis, some feeling of gloom that Europe has no more potential for further growth, and that's simply not true. There is a lot of potential for growth here. There is a lot of potential to raise productivity in many countries, and that's the way to deal with debt levels.
Well, to what extent can Eurozone countries grow sustainably if at least 5 of them need to continue with deflationary policies, that is, lowering labor costs to regain competitiveness?
Well, competitiveness has to be reached by not so much by monetary policy. That will be an easy way, but I think if we do it right, if we do it structurally right, competitiveness can be regained by bringing down costs of production, obviously, by raising productivity, which is always a little harder and takes longer, but it has to be done. We have to make sure that in all our countries we keep investing in research and development, keep investing in education at a high level, to make sure that productivity is also raised over the next couple of years. So that there are different ways to regain our growth potential, take away the red tape and all the hinder that is there in product markets and service markets. Also, very interesting at the moment, the trade agreements that are being negotiated can contribute also to further growth, also for Europe. So there are different strategies that we have to follow at the same time. International trade, opening up product and service markets, bringing down the short-term costs of production in a number of countries, and investing for the longer term in research and development and education.
Well, do you believe that the competitiveness in many European countries are going to be sustainable over time, or you worry that this effort will diminish as the recovery gains pace?
No, I don't think so. Actually, many of the reforms that we are now discussing will pick up pace or deliver extra growth in the midterm. So much of the work that we have to do now, start reforms, making some fundamental changes to how our economies work, won't deliver a short-term effect, but will probably deliver more effect in the medium term. Yet we have to do them now. If we don't do them now, we will not get that effect. So I'm not worried about a short revival if we take the right steps, if politically we can push forward some of the measures which in the short term will not be popular. I can tell you from experience they will not be popular, but in the midterm it delivers extra potential.
A couple of questions about the banking union. Is there a lot of faith that the banking union will provide stability in the Eurozone? Do you think it's a sustainable measure without a fiscal union?
The last question, I would definitely say yes. However you may feel about further integration of the fiscal union, the banking union in itself is crucial. Like Christine Lagarde said, we don't know the figures of our banks, but what we do know is that there is a general distrust or a worry that there may still be problems in our banks. And that is hindering credit going out there, that is hindering funding to the banks. So the first step that we have to take, and we have to get it right, is to take all of our major banks through the asset quality review, get them up to shape, make sure that they are fully funded again, and at the end of this year, that is exactly the process that we will go through. It's a crucial element of bringing back new credit flow and new investment possibilities to the euro economy. So the banking union should not be hindered by the larger debate about the future of the fiscal policy. We should push forward banking union right now. It's my top priority to get it done. As you know, we are working on the final building block. We've put the Capital Requirements Directive in place. Michel Barnier is not here anymore. I was going to give him all the credit for all the good work he's done on that. The capital requirements, the supervisor, the SSM, the European supervisor, the BRRD, including the bail-in rules, which are an essential instrument in the way that we will deal with banks in the future. Now we are working on the last part, which is the SRM, the Single Resolution Fund and the authority. And the Parliament has a couple of concerns, which I take very seriously, and I think we can work with the Parliament to find an agreement on that as well. And then at the end of this month, or in April, we will have all the building blocks of the banking union in place. And I think we've done that in a period of less than 2 years, which is quite an amazing political move. I don't think anyone would have expected us to deliver on all these crucial parts of the banking union within 2 years.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unfortunately, we run out of time.
Okay.
I think this has been an interesting projection into the next challenge for Europe. As you say, Europe has taken some defensive measures to contain the crisis, and as you say, we can and must do more to consolidate growth, restructure, become more competitive, and the ultimate goal being to sustain the social welfare model that Europe has. So I'd like to thank you again and introduce the next panel. Our next special session follows immediately. We have two distinguished speakers, Maria Luisa Albuquerque, the Minister of Finance of Portugal, and Werner Hoyer, President of the European Investment Bank. They will speak on the financing of small and medium enterprises and the challenges that these enterprises face and their role in the European recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you.